Welcome to our Leadership Professional Development Series to help you speak, sound, and look like a leader. Today, we're going to be discussing how to care enough to expect excellence through better communication. I'm Linda Katz-Wilner, the founder of Successfully Speaking, and I work with leaders and aspiring leaders to improve their executive presence and communication skills. Today, I'm excited to have our guest, Chris McDonell. Chris is the president of McDonell Consulting Group and Sandler. Chris and I have worked together over the years and collaborated, and both of us appreciate the need to communicate effectively. Welcome, Chris. It's great to
Thank
have
you
you
so
here.
much. Oh, it's great to be here, Linda. Thank you.
And Chris, we've talked about this a lot in the past, and I just want to ask you some of these questions. What do leaders need to be more aware of today so that they can communicate more effectively both with their team and with other leaders?
Well, great question to get us started. I think a couple of things is number one is awareness. And Linda, understanding who their teams are critically important. In other words, I think sometimes it's easy for a leader to lead in mass or manage in mass. In other words, get up in the morning, go to work, and treat everyone the same.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the fundamental problem with that is that we all walk the same hallways, but our realities are different. So to recognize that our team members are different doesn't mean we give exception, doesn't mean there's special privileges or for just randomly. It means we understand how to communicate to each other. Like, for example, Linda, if all of a sudden I'm gonna put a virtual simulation here.
Sure.
If all of a sudden you had three, or let's say four children, four virtual children, right? Boom. I'll take them back. Don't worry. But they were ages 3, 9, 13, and 21.
Mm-hmm.
Would you communicate the same way with each of them, or would you adjust a bit?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And if I did, they might resent that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So as if all of a sudden your virtual 3-year-old walked into my office, I'm not going to say, "Hey, what's up?" I'm going to adjust everything. I'm going to adjust my tone. "Hey, how you doing, buddy?" Let's say with a boy, and I do something like this. Now, if your 21-year-old walked in here, I wouldn't do that. That'd be weird. I'd be like, "Hey, how are you?" It's a totally different thing. So I think number one is to recognize we all walk the same hallways, but our realities are different, and we need to understand our team. That's first and foremost.
And I'll add to that, Chris, because that's the basis of public speaking. And that is know your audience.
Yeah.
You're not going to give the same talk to 3 different companies if the audience is different, if the generations are different, if the roles are different.
Right.
So it's the same idea. And I remember even with my child once, when he was growing up, he said, "Why do you speak differently to adults? And when my friend came over, you changed your voice." So that was very perceptive, right? We do that, and we do it naturally, and it's code switching depending on our audience. That's great.
Absolutely.
I love the way you talk about it with the 4 children, but do I have to keep those 4 children?
No, I'm taking them back right now.
Thank you. Thank you. So along those lines, what do you think gets in the way of the effective communication?
So number one is head trash. We all have it, and leaders have it. We may think, well, what worked in the past in a situation, talking to somebody or a difficult issue will just work in the future. And we tend to, quite frankly, when it gets to communication, is what gets in the way is not listening.
Mm-hmm.
Now, everyone's heard of active listening, and using more than your ears, and of course, restatement, paraphrasing, and understand the importance of that and when to do it. But it's more than that. I think that anyone, Linda, that proclaims that they are an awesome listener, if someone said, "I am the best listener on the planet," I'm looking at them like they have 3 heads,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because listening is hard.
Mm-hmm.
we're always thinking different things, right? We're always processing. We think we have the answer. There's competitive listeners, right? Where a leader might listen and say, "Oh, I have the answer to that," or or combative, or But to be able to listen to someone, and if you were saying something to me, and I were to say, "Linda, let me just clarify. What I hear you saying is blah 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 blah. Just make sure that I get that correctly."
Mhm.
And I think sometimes we're moving so fast, we forget to do that.
Chris, I've talked to a lot of people about the active listening, and I personally don't like that term because we can fake active listening.
Yeah.
We can do the head nods, the mm-hms,
Mhm.
but very often we're not even listening. We're thinking, like you mentioned, what am I going to say next? Or how am I going to respond to that? And I'm missing the subtle nuances that are coming from that person who's speaking to me.
Which is a lot.
Mhm.
Which is a lot. And to your point earlier, we have our body language, we have our tonality, and we have the actual words. Now, this can be debated as far as the overall percentage in that pie graph, but oftentimes speaking, the words are going to hold a lower meaning at the expense of someone's tone and body language. Like if I were to say to you, if you said something to me and I would say with no tone, no body language, if you said something that was made me go, that makes sense. Now, are you convinced that that makes sense to
Mhm.
me? No. I could go, that makes sense. What message does that tell you?
So I get your visual. And again, this is my three V's, that visual, that vocal, and the verbal. So
Yeah,
I'm looking at your visual and your
right.
vocal tone, and I'm not paying as much attention to the
No,
words or the verbal.
right. So if I go, that makes sense, I mean, then I'm like being sarcastic. But
Mhm.
if I say, that makes sense, it's a totally different meaning. And I
Mhm.
think what gets in the way of leaders being effective leaders is that awareness to be able to do that. Because people have two needs typically, to be heard and understood.
Mhm.
And when we give that to them in the right nurturing way, um, there's clear understanding. There's less of a guard
Mhm.
up as well.
And again, those three V's that you're talking about, and I tend to coin it that way with the visual, vocal, verbal, part of it is how we send our message. But the other part, which you were just alluding to, is how do we perceive it in others? I'm listening to what you're saying, I'm listening to how you're saying it, and I'm watching how you look when you say it. And so it goes back and forth constantly.
Right.
And we can misread that if we're not paying attention.
Well, one of my mentors many years ago, and I've been very fortunate to have a lot of really good mentors. Um, they said you cannot not communicate. You cannot not communicate. And there might be some leaders that will go, well, geez, I didn't even say anything to them. Well, it's what you didn't say with their perceptions, or just things like that. Or I mean, silence. People will fill in so many different things. So yeah, to your point, you cannot not communicate.
And communication is not just your words by any means.
No.
And so as a leader, how does a leader ensure that there's positive and negative feedback flowing back and forth in both directions?
So feedback is it's one of the most needed things, if you will, that anyone needs. Everyone needs feedback.
Mhm.
But a lot of times leaders were either too late giving feedback. If something occurred that on a particular day, there might be a bunch of reasons like, well, it's late in the day, it's 3 o'clock, I'll just wait till tomorrow. Or they've had a bad day already. I'm not sure I want to give that feedback. But feedback should be timely, it should be genuine, and quite frankly, from an opportunity to give someone, whether it's negative feedback or feedback to improve on something, it's all about what that expected behavior was. So I might say something like this, um, Linda, I expected the report to be done at 9 o'clock. It's now 10 o'clock. And if I'm quiet right after that, I state what I expected, I state what I observed. I'm not being sarcastic. I'm not saying like, "Oh my gosh," this to put you on the defensive.
Mhm.
State what I expected, state what I observed, and be quiet. Then what would you have to do in that situation?
I need to fill it in. I
Fill it
need
in.
to respond.
Yeah. It might be 5 seconds.
Mhm.
It might be 10 seconds. But the thing is, one of the hardest things to do in giving feedback is to keep it objective, keep it
Mhm.
without, we got to watch our tone. We can't have a
Mhm.
parental tone. We can't have a sarcastic tone. Now, sarcasm is very important to our health. We're a very sarcastic family, but
Mhm.
sarcasm in leadership, you know,
Mhm.
boy, my 3 year old could have done that better. I mean, that's not helping anything,
Mhm.
right?
Yes. And it's very hard to not say something, but it's
Extremely
so
hard.
important. It's so important. And you brought something up, Chris, and you know I do a lot of work with non-native English speakers.
Yes.
Sarcasm should never be used if somebody's a non-native speaker. They may not get it because sarcasm is using the words but changing the tone and sometimes the expressions, the facial
Yes.
expressions. And some people don't understand it. So you're going to have a lot of breakdown in communication with that.
Absolutely.
So
Sarcasm, giving someone a label, like, how could you be so fill in the blank, all those things. Again, there's a time and a place. And but in that type of environment, like you said, especially if it's a different native language,
mhm.
the meanings can be very, very different.
And besides the language, the other thing to think about is the culture in how different cultures give feedback. And can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know some cultures, sometimes we talk about sandwich it, say something good, and then say something that needs to be corrected, but end it with something good. And that's some cultures, but I know for France, for example, is much more direct, and they're
Right.
going to just say it like it is. Can you address that a little bit?
Would love to. I was taught many years ago, many, many years ago in my corporate world, my corporate days, the sandwich approach, right?
Mhm,
You take some good stuff in the middle, you put the opportunity for improvement, if you will, or
mhm,
that negative stuff, and then have that good stuff at the end. What I found over time, and there's some that truly believe in that. If that's the case, that's completely fine.
mhm,
What I have found that waters it down and that takes the um, the specificness. It doesn't mean that you need to be so direct that that person just is totally blindsided,
mhm,
but it means to be candid. State what you if you want to, from a coaching perspective, to improve behavior. Then again, state what you expected, state what you observed, then be quiet. Then we're listening for ability or motivation blocks. Is it ability? Is it skills? Is it training? Is it the wherewithal, the resources, or is it motivation? You know, motivation to escape a comfort zone, to actually have a conversation or pick up the phone, whatever it is. Motivation to stop planning and start actually executing. So a leader has to be able to step back and determine if it's ability or motivation. And I think that the sandwich approach just kind of allows people to walk away from a conversation without truly understanding what behavior needs to be corrected
mhm.
and where they should go from there. It just kind of just muffles it a little bit.
Well, and we usually remember the last thing that we're told, and that's why we're supposed to summarize when we're speaking. And so if I went to you, you were the leader, Chris, and you're giving me some feedback and you tell me some things I do really well, you tell me where I need to improve, but you want to make me feel good and end it on a positive note. There's that chance I'll walk out of that meeting and saying, I did a great job. That's what
Right.
Chris told me. That's the last thing I remember. So am I going to then take those steps to make the changes that you really wanted to bring to my attention?
Absolutely. And it truly can lead, and most of the time that approach can lead, it's more for the leader's comfort zone than than the recipient,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Because we truly want to hold people accountable. We truly want to give feedback. Um, but feedback, I mean, you think about your original question around feedback. Um, we have filters on how we accept feedback, right? Um, there's people that we trust and we take feedback from. There's people we don't trust and it's hard to take feedback from, but we all have filters. So I ask any leader, before you can become really good at giving feedback, you have to become really good at receiving
Hmm.
feedback and understanding what that means, because there's a lot of times where it might be like defending, deflecting, that's not me, or blame this. But then I give feedback to people. I don't know why they don't understand it, why they complain. But that's, again, it's how do we accept feedback ourselves? That makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense, but it also, what you also said is you have to know each person and they have to trust you and respect you.
Yeah,
Because depending who's telling me or giving me that feedback, I'm going to look at it different ways if I don't trust them or if I think they're trying to undermine me. And I think you're touching on some of the radical candor that they talk about, that if you trust and respect that person, you'll take a lot from them because you know they have your best interests at heart, in their heart, and they're looking to improve you. Whereas if you have a challenge with somebody and you're not really relating well to them, and as soon as they give you that feedback, you're destroyed, but you're angry and you won't listen.
absolutely. Absolutely. And the you just made me flash back to my first performance review as an employee that my leader gave me many years ago.
Mhm.
This was I was what, 22 at the time, mid 22, 23
A few
in
years.
financial services. Yeah, long time ago. And so he basically told me, he said, listen, I'm going to give you a performance review. We're going to go next door. And there was actually an Irish pub next door.
Mhm.
And so we went up to the bar and he gave me, he says, I'll buy you a drink, buy you a beer. And by the way, here's your review. You're doing great. Just sign here. Let's not worry about that. Let's just, hang out. And I'm like, at first, Linda, I thought, wow, what a great guy. We're just hanging out. But then I realized a couple of days later, I'm like, I didn't get any feedback.
Yeah.
I got nothing. Right. And that was more about him just
Mhm.
wanting to, go out there and do that. But it wasn't, I got no feedback. So we all need it. And I can
And
still remember that.
and you just triggered something for me as well, Chris. In a situation where that person may be even intimidated by you, even though you're reporting to them.
Right.
I know some people who just didn't want to give performance reviews
Oh,
because
yeah.
they weren't comfortable with maybe perhaps my level of expertise. So I never got the guidance or feedback that I still wanted, even though I may have been seasoned in that position. Give me feedback. Isn't that the point of a performance review?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I guess for leaders, they have to know how to do a performance review and have a relationship with that person so they also know how to communicate with them and what works best for them.
Absolutely. And we could go pretty far in the weeds on the performance review topic. I say, just to kind of, one thing to add to that is stating the obvious, a performance review should never be a surprise.
Hmm.
Just constant throughout the year. And if there's a formal review, then that's more of a, okay, oh yeah, nothing in here surprises me.
Right.
All this makes sense. Something I'm still working on. Here's my opportunities for improvement. Here's what I'm excelling at. And again, that feedback mechanism through conversations,
Hmm.
continual conversations
Hmm.
with leaders. But a lot of leaders that get promoted, they might be supervising people they used to work with on the same team.
Hmm.
Very uncomfortable at first, and
Yes.
that could be a lot of comfort zones and head trash to work with.
Yeah. I love that you said that the performance review shouldn't be a surprise and shouldn't just be that one time that year that they're discussing it.
Yeah,
Hopefully there's been communication and somebody knows if they're having issues or if they're having successes that they've had that conversation before.
100%.
Chris, we could talk about this for a long time, and like you said, to get into the weeds. But let me move to another question, and that is, I'd like to ask this of each of my guests,
Yeah,
since we talk about how to speak, sound, and look like a leader. I think you've answered it already in many ways, but what do you think is the essential skill to speak, sound, look, and perhaps even act like a leader?
I'll answer that through the eyes of for the importance of vulnerability. And I'll say this as I think leaders should be humbly confident. In other words, to be able to share vulnerability, to leave the ego at the door, to not worry about some of the things of being right all the time. It's not
Mhm.
about that. It's about understanding your team. So vulnerability, understanding your team, and again, humbly confident. Uh,
Mhm.
and I think a lot of leaders, especially newer leaders, that get really wrapped up in the fact that they have to know everything.
Mhm.
They are the boss. Um, and at the end of the day, their job is to develop a team, develop that trust, and being vulnerable
Mhm.
is not easy.
Right.
It takes time. It takes work.
That's great. I like that because leadership doesn't mean you have to be the smartest person in the
No,
room or the most important person in the room.
far from it.
We're learning that. That's not necessarily the best leader. It might be a leader, but that may
Right.
not be the right leader. Uh,
Absolutely.
Chris, Chris, how can people get in touch with you? Of course, I know LinkedIn. We're all on LinkedIn, and this is LinkedIn Live that we're doing. But
Yeah,
what other ways can they get in touch with you?
sure. Thanks for asking, Linda. Our website is one way, and the website is McDonell, McDonnell, one N, two L's, at Sandler.com, Sandler.com. And that's one of the great ways. And the other is my email, Chris, Chris, dot McDonnell at Sandler.com.
Great, great. And I know I'm sure people have questions, and you are so knowledgeable. I love speaking to you
Likewise.
about the training, but I know we've had so many conversations, and I love how we both look at the what I call the three V's of communication, because if you don't think about those three aspects, you're missing the mark in communicating. And it's a great way to observe people, and it's a great way to speak. So thanks so much for sharing your wisdom with this group and everybody who's listening today, Chris.
Thank you, Linda. Always a pleasure.
Sure. And I'd like everybody to join us in 2 weeks on September 26th, when Karen Snyder, who is a friend of mine and the owner and lead consultant at Concordia Consulting, will discuss another great topic for leaders: creating a positive culture within your leadership team, which is something that's so important today. And until then, let's think how we can use our communication skills, both our spoken skills and our listening skills, so that it leads to excellence with our teams, with our groups, with our clients and organizations. And Chris, thanks again. It was wonderful speaking with you.
My pleasure. Thank you.